Welcome to Spectrum Psychological. My name is Alexander. I'm a psychologist by training, and in this video, I'm going to talk about PTSD, which is short for post-traumatic stress disorder. So, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a psychological injury. So it's the kind of injury a person can sustain if they've been exposed to a seriously traumatic event where their lives were literally in danger, uh, or where they witnessed somebody else getting severely injured, or somebody else's life was in danger and they witnessed that. So, how do we know that a person has PTSD? Well, first of all, just like a person can have a physical injury, a person can have a psychological injury. And as there are symptoms of a physical injury, broken leg, person's bleeding, they're having difficulty walking as a result of the injury, and so on. Similarly, a psychological injury also has symptoms. And in this case, in the case of PTSD, one key symptom is what we refer to as flashbacks. So a person is sort of visualizing a scene or a few scenes that happened in that particular incident, and they keep replaying that in their heads. So flashbacks can be visual, but they can also be flashbacks can also be auditory. Certain sounds are kind of stuck in the person's head, and they sort of keep hearing that sound again and again. Or they can be olfactory too, and they can smells. For example, one of my patients involved in a motor vehicle accident with a fuel truck, and they kept smelling afterwards, kept smelling gas everywhere. There wasn't any gas around, but they just seemed to have this thing happening to them. So that's a flashback. It's an olfactory flashback. So flashbacks can be visual, they can be olfactory, they can be auditory, they can be all of them together at the same time. While a person is having these flashbacks, they can end up sort of dissociating. It's a term that we use, meaning that it's almost like this sort of movie, they're kind of in a trance, and this movie is playing out in front of them. They're doing dishes, and all of a sudden they're somewhere else, or they're sitting in a group of people, all of a sudden they're somewhere else. So they can have flashbacks, they can have nightmares or bad dreams. Those nightmares or bad dreams can be about the incident itself or something related to the incident. They can also be seemingly unrelated to the incident. Just bad dreams, nightmares, or they had a really bad motor vehicle accident, for example, but where they almost died, or somebody else almost died, or there was a fatality, but they're dreaming about other stuff like falling off a cliff, or people are chasing them, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a sort of cluster of symptoms. Then another symptom that goes along with PTSD is, very frequently mood swings, or just really depressed. Sometimes they feel like they're okay. At other times, they're really down in the dumps, or they're just depressed. They're just not feeling okay and really feeling blue and sad. That's a key symptom that goes along with these. We were looking for like a cluster of symptoms. That's what we're looking for to diagnose PTSD. Are these things there? Another symptom is that they're very kind of what we refer to as hypervigilant, very easily startled, just anxious, monitoring their environment, half expecting something to happen again, something to go wrong again. For example, if they're driving, just very anxious, nervous, and tense, just monitoring the environment and half expecting that someone's going to run into them, or they're going to run into somebody. So that's another symptom. they also tend to avoid, they don't want to talk about it, they want to think about it, the incident. They try to avoid going to the area where something like that happened, the incident happened, or they avoid going to areas that remind them of that particular incident. So when you start adding up these pieces, the hypervigilance, the flashbacks, nightmares, the sort of avoidance, the mood lability, so heightened bouts of anxiety. So anxiety really goes up, and it can go up to a point where they're literally having a panic attack, where the heart's beating out of their chest and they're shaking and trembling and crying. And sometimes people think they're having a heart attack. It can get so bad and end up in a hospital thinking they're having a heart attack, but they're having very severe panic attacks. So that sort of goes along with PTSD. Sleep is impaired. So this cluster of symptoms that emerges tells us that something is obviously wrong, and it happens after the incident, which is what post means: post-traumatic, post-trauma stress disorder. So if we look at all these symptoms and they meet the criteria that we're looking for, then we can say that they have PTSD. So when we are talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, the symptoms can be sort of repressed, if you will. They may not necessarily emerge fully immediately after the incident, after the traumatic incident. So some of them may, sometimes people have been through a really traumatic incident and they're kind of in this numbed stage. So the symptoms may not necessarily emerge till so weeks after, sometimes months after, and for some people even years later. For example, soldiers returning from war, they can come back, seems like they're doing okay, they're settling in okay, and then year, 2 years, 3 years later, they can start to experience this unraveling kind of effect, where all these symptoms that I'm talking about are starting to just come out of nowhere. And that's the thing about post-traumatic stress disorder, is that it's post, but that post can be shortly after the incident, the traumatic incident. It can be a lot after, it can be quite a lot after. So this sort of gives you an idea. I mean, this is of course not a definitive video on post-traumatic stress disorder, but it sort of gives you an idea of what can happen when a person has been involved in a traumatic incident. And so just like we can sustain physical injuries, we can also sustain psychological injuries, and post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological injury, one kind of a psychological injury. It's not a small thing. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a huge phenomenon. Most certainly, I cannot speak to it in the way that one would want to in one small video, because it's such a huge issue. But it can have a global effect on a person's life. People can have a hard time concentrating, attending, because they're experiencing all these symptoms. So it can impact their jobs. They can end up losing their jobs. They can be very irritable, very reactive. They can end up quitting their jobs. So it can have an impact on their jobs. And they may not really understand why, because it's not a physical thing. Like a broken leg, you can see that I have a broken leg, and as a consequence of that, there are many things that I cannot do, and they're impacting my life. But this is inside. It's like in a person's mind, the injury is there, and the person cannot see this injury. Others cannot see this injury, so may not understand what's going on. They might think that, the person's being moody, or they're overreacting, or they're just freaking out for no reason, things like that. So but this post-traumatic stress disorder if a person has it, it can impact their lives globally, on the job, occupational front, like I said, but also on the personal relationships, because they can get triggered and they can experience all these mood swings just out of the blue. And they can be very reactive, very emotional, and partners, family members just don't understand. I mean, why they're like this, and they seem to be just very unpredictable. And it's because of this psychological injury. The person can carry a lot of guilt. They can blame themselves because they cannot see the injury. If it hasn't been diagnosed or not being treated, and they don't understand it, they cannot see the injury. So they think, well, I'm doing this. I'm messing up. I'm screwing up everywhere, and they carry a lot of guilt, not just for the mistakes that they keep making and the consequences that are happening in their lives, but even for their emotionality and their inability to control their emotion and the psychological part that's going on, the fearfulness, the anxiety, the up and down of the mood, the reactivity, the brooding, sort of withdrawal, and sometimes just breaking down and crying, seemingly for no reason. So it's a really huge phenomenon. But in this video, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you at least sort of a window into this particular psychological issue, the psychological injury, so you can understand what this phenomenon is. And if you've experienced a very severe event in your life, and what I'm talking about here makes sense, it's worthwhile speaking to a psychologist who has some experience in this particular field, in trauma and PTSD, etc. Because we can actually do a lot to help people recover from a post-traumatic stress disorder, this kind of a psychological injury. We may not be able to help them fully recover. A lot of people do fully recover. So it's not a terminal sentence, but we can do a lot. If you're experiencing anything like what I'm talking about in here, it's worthwhile talking to a qualified psychologist who deals with this particular issue, trauma, PTSD, etc. Because we really can help people improve very dramatically, very significantly. That can be achieved, and but it requires, obviously, it requires diagnosis and proper diagnosis, and then there's a very specific treatment that goes along with it that can help the person recover. So anyway, just the purpose of this video was really to provide a window into this phenomenon, which is a very interesting phenomenon, but interesting in the sense that it causes so many issues for people who've been involved in serious traumatic incidents. And so I hope it's been of some help to you, and it's provided some information, useful, meaningful information. If you have any questions, you're welcome to send them to me, and I'll try to answer them. And anyway, good luck and take care.